Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny has a box office projection that continues to drop. Already down at $60 million for its domestic 3-day opening, even going into the Independence Day holiday weekend. Well, it's dropping perhaps even farther, and we anticipate that it may be at $50 million very soon. But today we want to take a different angle on it. We want to examine why. Why are people abandoning films such as this? And what are we truly looking for in our heroes? All right, folks, welcome back to another fantastic day here at the WDW Pro channel. Such a joy to get to share our time with each and every one of you. If this is your first time here, we hope you walk away better than when you entered into this video, truly. And folks, if you like content like this, consider clicking the like button, share, subscribe, and you can stick it to the algorithms when you click it. We're talking about the notification bell. Dropping on by the old Casa de Pro is Lauren Connor of ThatParkPlace.com, resident Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and Lucasfilm guru. Lauren, welcome back.
Thank you.
Now, Lauren, we are here to discuss Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. As you know, this is a movie which is not in a good place financially. It is perhaps one of the most expensive films ever made. $332 million is the baseline that has been presented to us, although we believe it probably goes beyond that. The marketing, even higher. And now we are seeing that this film is going to come out to some of the most terrible box office results you can imagine. 60 million is optimistic at this point, 50 million more likely for its opening domestic weekend. And while that might be okay for some indie film, not Indiana, the issue here is that this film needs something like $1 billion to break even. And it's very sad to know that Harrison Ford may go out his last time as the lead action hero with a film that does not meet the expectations. Let's read an article out of Outkick, and then, Lauren, we are going to flip the script on all of this. And we are going to shift this to a dose of positivity for everybody out there. So hang tight, folks. We're getting to it. The article is by David Hookstead. New Indiana Jones film expected to be box office disaster. Indiana Jones: The Dial of Destiny might put up some very disappointing numbers at the box office. The fifth film with Harrison Ford as the title character premieres June 30th. Fans are hyped up and ready to watch Ford ride off into the sunset after playing Indiana Jones one last time. Not only is it Ford's final film in the franchise, there's a very high chance it will be the last Indiana Jones film ever made. Soak it up while you can. And folks, I don't agree with that at all. I do not discount that in 50 years we may get some sort of artificially intelligent created film. Who knows? It may be even shorter than that. We'll see. Well, despite the fact it's Ford's final ride, the box office numbers might not be overly large. And here's where we get into some difficult truths. The newest Indiana Jones movie is tracking to earn roughly $60 million for its opening weekend. That might sound like a ton of money, and it would be for a lot of movies. However, this is Indiana Jones we're talking about, and that's not an impressive number at all. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull had a 3-day opening of more than $100 million, more than 15 years ago. And folks, don't forget, that is at a time when movie tickets were basically half the cost. Were that film to come out today and make the same kind of ticket sales, it would generate something like $200 million. We are looking at ticket sales for The Dial of Destiny coming in at a quarter of the original ticket sales, not the money, the actual butts and seats, a quarter of the same number of people going to see this as they did the Crystal Skull. Now, Dial of Destiny is expected to earn right around 60%, as much as the fourth film. It goes on to talk about comparables. You've got Top Gun Maverick, which came out to 126.7, and folks, don't forget, now we consider that to be a soft opening because it went on to have a hold that was absolutely heroic, continuing to make hundreds of millions of dollars over and over. What a movie. Lauren, what I really want to talk about, though, besides the bad reviews and all of this stuff, but I am convinced, and you and I talked before we did this video together, I'm convinced that what is going on here is that The whole world is experiencing lots of bad news, and we've been through some really bad news. So you might think about, well, I'll give you one example. So there's a story right now out of Florida, and I'm debating whether or not to cover it. And that story has to do with protesters, or perhaps they are political, saboteurs. Who knows what they are? But they're out there with these signs about a horrifically bad um, group of people from the 1930s. I think you can figure out. Indiana Jones likes to take them down as well. But they're out there with signs for them, and they've got DeSantis out there, signs. And who knows if they're legitimate or if they're actually trying to, create some sort of PR sabotage. Who knows? And I don't even want to cover it because it's just so vile. And then you've got all the stories coming out about, the Call of Duty situation. We just did the Overwatch situation at the same company where they lied to consumers for over a year and then used the month of June and what happens in the month of June as a cover up for it to switch the script. And I just think that there's plenty of negativity in the world. And I think that the original writers, director of this film, that they have missed the ball. They don't understand that people are looking for a hero. And while I can respect the idea of giving us an Indiana Jones who is less than heroic in his twilight years, I think it's missing what we need, what the audience needs, what the world is looking for. And we're looking for heroism. We're looking to find out that our heroes won't let us down, even in the face of great trials and tribulation. Lauren, am I missing anything?
No, I don't think so. Um, Although while you were speaking, it made me think about the different ages of man. Um, when you're young, you tend to have nothing in the way of resources, and you're frustrated. You want everything now, and you have the ability to take big risks because you've got nothing to lose. And oftentimes, not quite yet the common sense to understand that maybe there's more to lose than you think. And so you're willing to take big risks and reap big rewards. Then you hit middle age and you start pining for those days back when you were young and virile and able to take these big risks and reap these big fortunes. Now you're having to hold on and defend everything. And it gets really difficult. I think this is why lots of people have their midlife crises. You're trying to recapture some of that to feel like you're alive and not just a drone of some sort. And then if you're very lucky and you've had a life where you have a family and something to take pride and joy in, if you're very lucky, you then have grandkids that you can then live vicariously through and see the miracle of youth and everything from a place of wisdom. And so I think that's maybe where they've gone a little astray in some of their storytelling is that it becomes almost an endless middle age where everything is just collapsing around you.
Those are great points. I'll tell you another thing that I'm pondering, Lauren, about Indiana Jones, and this is really a different strategy that they're taking. And you can almost see these two things going to a head versus the Tom Cruise approach with Top Gun Maverick, and we assume with Mission Impossible as well. And what I'm thinking about is I think there's something inside all of us that hopes that there's somebody, whether it's a paternal figure or a maternal figure, grandfather, grandmother, parent, uncle, aunt, a friend, a confidant, a best friend perhaps, but we're all looking for someone who, when the chips are down, when everything fails, when chaos takes over, that you can count on them and that they're unbreakable. They're standing man, if you get that reference.
Mhm.
And I think that our heroes that we have turned into icons, right? They're the stars. We call them stars. We call them that because we look up to them, just like stars. They help us navigate. It's the whole idea behind having movie stars. Well, I think when it comes with a character like Indiana Jones, we want to believe that no matter his age, no matter the circumstances, that he will not let others down. It's the same thing that we wanted to see out of Luke Skywalker, that no matter what, this is a character that we can look up to. And I think that's what we got out of Top Gun. I think that's why it took off. I don't think it necessarily that it has to do with the planes. And by the way, this is the type of conversation that I think may resonate with the audience deeply. I hope for those of you listening right now, maybe you're shaking your head yes as you listen to this, but just to finish off this thought, I think that the reason that we want these characters to be the best possible form of themselves that they can be is because they represent something inside of us that if we aspire to it and we work diligently towards it, that we can be unbreakable, that we can be standing man, and that when the trials and tribulations, and they definitely come, when they arrive at our door, that the people who look to us for help, for assistance, that will be available because we won't break. What do you think?
Well, the first thing I want to say is I think it had at least a little bit to do with the planes. I don't want to. I,
Okay, okay.
I don't want to discount the planes entirely. I like
The
the
planes were
planes.
very cool.
But I would take this back to Ray and why she doesn't particularly resonate with the audience. There is the Luke example, yes. The problem with what they did with Luke is that um, the way Luke was set up in the original movies is that he always does the right thing. Maybe he's brash about it. Maybe he doesn't throw a lot of thought into it. Maybe he disregards what everybody is telling him is wise. But if his friends are in danger, he's going to go rescue them. He's going to be the guy that shows up and is there for you no matter what. And he's going to cut through the droids and the fire and everything else, and he's going to rescue you. That's what Luke Skywalker does.
And
So
that
see,
represents the absolute best that we can hope to be. That's
and
what
so
draws us to it.
seeing what he became immediately trips every red flag that an audience could have. Now, I think there's a way you could tell that story. We talked about it in one of the earlier videos where you say he is actually doing it for a reason. If you give him a reason, and then you show that maybe it's not that he's lost all faith, but that he has missed the fact that maybe he's acting out of fear or something else, and then somebody can bring that to him, and he recognizes, oh, you're right, I've made a mistake.
Do
That
you know
can
what you're
work.
describing, Lauren? You're
Hmm.
describing Top Gun Maverick, because that's
Well,
what Maverick does with the son. Is he tries to protect him until he realizes he's doing it out of fear, and he must let the fallen friend's son rise, even at the risk of his own self. And then, but he does not relinquish the paternal desire to watch over him and protect him at all costs, even to his own death.
but this also goes to why Ray ends up becoming, without any intention of the script or Daisy's performance or anything else, she becomes an unlikable character because she has no flaws. The utility of all of these stories is to show, first of all, this is the man that you are, or the person that you are. You have flaws, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to be arrogant, you're going to be greedy, you're going to make a wrong choice at the wrong time, and it's going to have an impact on your life that is negative. But from that, you take and you learn something and you try to make yourself into a better person. And you work at that flaw in yourself. And then when you do overcome it, you've reached your enlightened self. Now you're a better person than you were before, and you can take that knowledge to somebody else and try to pass it on. And then there's the whole issue with growing older where you now have the wisdom, but you try and pass it off to youth that doesn't, and they ignore you and think you're crazy until they go through the whole cycle themselves. So that's why these stories repeat through history. So,
Well, and that is one of the interesting paradoxes of humanity, is that in your youth you are so physically vibrant, but you lack the wisdom and you don't even know it, which would thereby mean you lack the wisdom. And then as you get older, your wisdom and your ability to navigate the world increases dramatically from the interior of yourself, but the exterior, the physicality that you have diminishes. And so you have these two things running in opposite directions. But I also think that develops the interesting part of passing on the wisdom from generation to generation. Lauren, one of the cool things, and I hadn't thought about bringing this up. One of the cool things that I was listening to recently was paying very close attention to a discussion about cultures and about what causes some cultures and some societies to rise at times and others to fall. And there was a very interesting thesis that I heard from someone. They were talking about the country of Japan and what caused it to rise into prominence at some point, 1700s, 1800s, etc. And one of the things that they said about the country of Japan, and we know that there was a major conflict, of course, between Japan and the West against the United States, and we'll leave that out for now. But one of the interesting things that was being discussed was that if you look at different countries and you try to determine what causes them to rise or fall, you might think, well, it has everything to do with resources, or it has everything to do with population, or it has everything to do with territorial advantages. And they said, but the problem is that Japan defies all of that. Japan has essentially no natural resources. It's just mountainous. There's nothing there to pull out of the soil in comparison to other places. It's like West Virginia surrounded by water, and yet Japan turned into one of the greatest nations in the world for hundreds of years. And the thesis that was behind that was that what drove Japan into prominence, into greatness, was not natural resources, was not the quality of their terrain, but instead was something far more meaningful. And that their most important resource was trust. And that trust was based on a culture where people had honor and where you could believe what another person said. And so Japan's most valuable resource that drove it into prominence was this idea of truthfulness between one another. And I just wonder, as we're talking about this generational passing of knowledge, which is the passing of truth, is part of what we've lost in Hollywood, and maybe this is the revolt that's happening right now, is because they stopped believing in truth, we stopped paying attention to what they had to say. Everything's become postmodern. Nothing is absolutely true. We have to question all of the old values and the old virtues. Everything is questioned. Did that drive the audiences away because we couldn't trust them any longer?
Not just that. I think I would say, in addition to honor for Japan, there was also cultural cohesion,
Yeah,
which is
absolutely.
under threat right now. But I think that it's sort of like when you're a kid, you never want to eat your vegetables. You want to have ice cream all the time, and if you do that, eventually you're going to throw up. It doesn't matter that it tastes great.
But it's a fun time until it happens.
Right. And so I think that's a lot of what we're dealing with right now, is that question everything is not necessarily bad advice until you start taking it absolutely literally. If you do take it absolutely literally, at that point, there's no longer any structure to anything. There's no way to compare one thing to another because there are no rules. There's no there's no thought behind anything
Well,
at
it's
that
when you
point.
question truth itself. It goes beyond, like, you're able to question anything. I think that's perfectly fine. But then when you say, well, I don't believe that there's one answer to this. And if there is one answer to it, well, that's a real issue because you're undermining the fabric of reality that helps you predict the future and know how to navigate the world.
Well, I think what I'm talking about is more relativism, and I think that at a certain point, it's okay to. Sometimes you can do a deconstruction of a character that works. There are ways to do that. I think that Frank Miller was a genius at it when he was dealing with Batman in the '80s. You want to see somebody deconstruct a character? There you go.
Well, and It's a
Um,
Wonderful Life is one of the most popular films for that very reason.
Sure. And so I think there are ways to do it. But when suddenly that's all you're getting, eventually you get tired of it. It's just you can't stomach it anymore. As you said, you want a hero at some point. They can't all be anti heroes. It's like the John Wayne versus Clint Eastwood debate. John Wayne hated what Clint did with the Western. I think you could do both. I think they're
Well, yeah, I
great.
agree with you. Yeah,
But you don't want all white hats and black hats, and you don't want all gray hats either. It's like you got to have a mixture.
but
If you do just one thing all the time, there's no magic anymore. You already know what's going to happen. So
But I do think, and I think this is true for Indiana Jones, and perhaps it's why people are so afraid to go and watch the film. They don't want to see another Jake Skywalker situation. I think people are starving right now to watch their heroes have the grit to just say, I'm going to sacrifice. I'm going to do what's right, period. And I think people are starving for that. Lauren, I largely think people are starving for it because not only is it absent from the big screen, but I think it's absent in their own lives. That because of the diminishment of our culture, because of the diminishment of our values, people aren't seeing the icons as readily anymore in their own lives, and they need to be re-inspired. That there are people, there is the ability to rise to the occasion.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think there's another element that we haven't touched on, and it's kind of sensitive, and
Let's go there.
I feel a little guilty even bringing this up. But it's that there's an elephant in the room here, and that's Harrison Ford and his age. Now, he is in excellent shape for his age, I believe, but South Park made fun of him playing Indy. What are we talking about now? 15 years ago, I think it
I
was.
think they were definitely more harsh with Steven Spielberg and George Lucas in that episode.
Yeah, but I mean, at a certain point, suspension of disbelief is one thing, but I think there comes a point at which the audience starts to feel guilty,
Yes.
maybe I may be making more of this than I need to. I know that I'm Harrison Ford's my favorite actor. I love many of the movies that he's been in. I'm not going to say all, but I love it when he's playing this type of character.
So some people debate Arnold, some people debate Sylvester, Sly. You're saying Harrison Ford is your favorite.
I would say probably. I love those guys too. Don't get me wrong, but
Understand?
when they announced this movie, there was a part of me that said, "It's you don't have to do this, Harrison. There's nothing to be gained here." I understand that they wanted to go out on a high note, to try and maybe soothe some of the feelings after Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but I think the risk was too great, both to the franchise and to Harrison himself. And that was borne out when he was injured during shooting again, which is sort of a tradition. But at this
Yes, yes.
age, you don't want that kind of thing to happen. So I think that may be another reason why the audience is a little squeamish on this movie. I'm going to go the opposite direction, though, a little bit and say I know you're saying that you think it may open at $50 million. I have a hard time believing these
Oh well,
numbers.
up until recently, I had an extremely difficult time believing that. I still can't believe it. Part of my brain can't accept that it's being announced at 60, and then
I,
then 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 that same part of my brain that's very logical is looking and saying, "Well, what's happening with every other Disney movie?" Well, the projections come out and then the projections drop in the time from the initial projection until the release. Okay, well, what will happen here? Well, it'll drop. And then the other part of my brain says, you got to be kidding. There's no way Indiana Jones can open at $50 million. Come on.
yeah, I mean, it's like there's. I don't get me wrong. I don't think the movie's going to be a smash hit, but there's a part of me that's saying, look, this is going to be right around the July 4th weekend. There's bound to be people just looking to go to the movies. Maybe they're not pre-purchasing a ticket. Maybe they're just going to go on a whim. I don't know, but there's a part of me that feels like these numbers feel real low. It's real hard for me to believe that it's really going to open at that. And if it does open at that, man, they're in even worse shape than I would have thought.
Well, I mean, if it opens where the projections currently are, I have said that they will expedite the process of removing Kathleen Kennedy. There is no conquering. There's no way she can come back if it opens at 60 million or less. That's so bad that anybody could outdo that. Anybody. You could pull in a high school graduate who knows nothing of film, and they could outdo that. That's the bottom. So that's what I think about that situation. But Lauren, I do want to wrap up. I want to chat because you are. I mean, I really do consider you a genius when it comes to Lucasfilm, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and more. But those are the things people know about you and know your genius level intelligence. and your knowledge as well. And I want to ask you, if they were going to make an Indiana Jones film for a 78, 79-year-old Harrison Ford, and you said to them, "Well, I don't think this is a good idea, but you're paying me $1 million to write the thing." Where would you have taken this that would have given Harrison Ford some dignity and that would have given the character dignity and perhaps presented us with an aged hero in the appropriate way?
I think I'd have to think about that a little more. It's the pitch that I like is the one that I talked about in an earlier video, which would be the Spear of Destiny against the Ark of the Covenant, with the Soviet Union being in
And I love
possession
I
of what.
love go ahead and explain that real quick. Give us the quick synopsis because it really is brilliant.
So I think they actually sort of touch on part of this in this new movie in the introduction. There was it's okay. So let me backtrack a little bit. The very bad man from World War II did have an obsession with artifacts that were considered to be mystical. And part of that came about from him visiting the Habsburg Museum when he was still young and seeing the Spear of Destiny there. This is the spear that pierced Christ's side on the crucifix. And he claimed that he had a vision of himself possessing this spear and using it to.
You know what's interesting, Lauren. Let me just say this too. What's very interesting about that? I mentioned this in the video, but I wasn't as articulate as I needed to be. What is interesting to me about that is just how symbolically awful that is. That
Mhm.
a terrible person who's leading a terrible cause would see the blade that is alleged to have pierced the icon of perfect virtue and goodness and thought, I need that. That's the item I need. It's
Well,
like, you know,
remember, the villain never sees themselves as the bad guy.
that's
So
right.
I think what's interesting about this is whether or not you believe that what was in the Habsburg Museum actually was the spear that pierced Christ's side. There is a legend associated with this spear in reality. This isn't made up Hollywood stuff. The legend is that whoever possesses the spear and carries it before them is essentially unstoppable. However, and this spear did pass through many conquerors' hands. It was said that if the person that held that spear then lost it, then their fortunes would turn quite considerably. Now, this is basically the same legend that is associated with the Ark, that the Israelites carried the Ark before them and were thus unstoppable in battle. And so I always thought that, well, what's interesting about this is that during the war, that very bad man actually did have the spear in his possession. He captured it, and it was on board a train that he kept moving. And on the day that that very bad man ended himself in a bunker, that is a day that that train was actually captured, and he lost the spear. Now, what's interesting about after the war is that the Soviets they were taking possession of East Berlin, and this is when the Iron Curtain was getting ready to fall. And so I always thought, well, this is great. You've got two artifacts that essentially have the very same power set. Whoever it is that possesses these items and carries them before their armies is unstoppable. And who's in possession of the opposing force to the Ark? Well, it's the Soviets. This is a Cold War era story. And so I thought,
Absolutely.
what was
And
always
Old
interesting.
Testament versus New Testament at that.
Right, and so I thought what was interesting about this is that, well, what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? That's an interesting idea to play with. These are religious artifacts in place of nuclear weapons, and so you sort of, if you want to subvert the expectations for Indiana Jones, what you're doing is you're not subverting the man. You're taking a man whose entire identity is around finding and preserving. Precious artifacts for the edification of mankind, who now has to retrieve both of these artifacts and make sure they're lost because man is not meant to be holding the power of God in his hands. And so I thought this is the twist that you give it, and you could bring the entire Indiana saga full circle here by going back to the Ark. And so that was my pitch. The problem with trying to tell that story now is that Harrison's too old. If you're going to tell that story, it pretty much needs to be either right after the war or no more than 10 years after. So,
Well, I personally think that would have been significantly better than what they are planning to do. And I hope that in the future, these movie studios will consider that we need heroes. We need characters who will overcome. We need to see the best of the human spirit represented. Not always, but in these iconic heroes, I think it's very important. It gives us something to aspire to. Lauren, where can people find you on this great, big, beautiful web out there?
you can find me at that Park Place, and you can find me on Valiant Renegades streams, usually in the chat on Sundays. I'm at Lauren Connor on Twitter and at Lauren Connor 9030 on YouTube.
There you go, folks. We hope that you have listened and enjoyed this video. We hope that it has given you a better day wherever you are. If you're going through something that's difficult, just remember that better days can lie ahead. And you're just the sort of person who deserves some of those better days. You may have to reach a higher potential than you know you are capable of. But in those types of situations, look to the heroes in your life, in your fiction, and elsewhere that can help you rise above the fray and become even better than you knew you could be. Folks, if you like content like this, consider clicking the like button, share, subscribe. And when you click it, you stick it to the algorithms. We're talking about that notification bell wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Keep learning, keep growing, and keep having fun, because people out there are depending on you.
Make sure to catch The Pro Show Thursdays 5 to 7 Eastern Time. Entertainment Explained, The Culture Curve Conquered, live with Pro and all his friends.